Marsy's Law Nevada State Director Will Batista is here with that side of it. Will, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so for those who are not familiar with Marsy's Law, it's a national Welcome back to Face the State. For our discussion of Nevada ballot question 1, I will start off with the group working together. Welcome back to Face the State. In the last segment, we heard the arguments in favor of Nevada ballot question 1. Now we will hear from the other side. Holly Wellborn, ACLU Nevada Policy Director, is here to talk about that. Holly, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, the ACLU is opposing Marsy's Law in every state where it's up for a vote. Tell me why.
Well, you know, Marsy's Law is a solution in search of a problem. That's the best way of summing it up. It is a very costly measure that burdens taxpayers. It also undermines well-established principles of justice that have protected criminal defendants for a very long time. It also does very little to actually help victims of crime. And we just think that instead of investing in something like Marsy's Law, this kind of experimental measure, that we should really be investing in programs that help victims, that provide services for victims.
How exactly does it tip the scales away from the rights of the accused? I guess it's not really what I'm not really seeing that.
Right. So the presumption of innocence, it's probably one of the cornerstones of constitutional law. We are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Marsy's Law, because victims are entitled to rights under this provision through every stage of the proceedings, it undermines that presumption of innocence by automatically assuming that that person is a victim. That's not the way our justice system is entitled to work. If someone's been damaged by someone, if someone has some kind of injuries, if they're in need of services, there's statutory laws that protect them. Whereas the Constitution is meant to protect people with their rights against the state, enforcing their rights against the state.
So do you have any examples you can give of how this hurts? I mean, like, how would this play out, I guess, in a criminal case?
So okay, we were talking about the presumption of innocence. So you have some kind of dispute. It could be, let's say, a domestic violence dispute. That actually adds another layer of something to look at for why Marsy's Law can be actually harmful to victims, because in many instances, it's not clear who a victim is. Domestic violence is a really great example of that. In those arrests, we have laws in Nevada that require 2 arrests when it isn't clear who the perpetrator is. So that person, what are they going to do? Their rights are suddenly in conflict. What rights in that instance, somebody who's been abused, who is then incarcerated, who then has to go through criminal proceedings, which rights supersede which rights? I think a court of law is going to have to make that determination. They're just going to conflict. Do their due process rights supersede? Can they enforce their rights as a victim? How will that balance be tilted? I think the question will be left to a court of law.
So the main dispute from the ACLU's perspective is that the law itself is poorly written.
It's that it's poorly written. I mean, but they're clear provisions. I mean, things are kind of stated. There are very vague provisions. For example, the definition of a crime victim, very, very broad definition. They talk about this concept of proximate victims, which means really anybody in the vicinity of a victim. It could be the family, a family member. It doesn't really even address whether or not we're talking about human victims of crime, individuals, or do corporations come into that? Does a corporation have the right to assert their rights under Marsy's Law? That's a question that needs to be deliberated. Again, I think that's another rights conflict that will be decided by a court. So if someone shoplifts, does Walmart or whatever corporation get to assert those rights and press charges against that person, or sue the state because they weren't happy with the outcome?
So do you believe then that some victim bill of rights is a necessary thing?
Victims' rights should and are protected in statute. A victim has the right, they have the last word before a person is sentenced. They have the right to have their voice heard at parole hearings. They have the right to, to protection orders, a variety of different laws that protect the rights of victims. The reason it's so important to keep it in statute rather than the Constitution is because those rights ebb and flow. When we're talking about a victim, we're talking about their rights as they relate to another individual, not their rights as it relates to the state. They're not losing a liberty interest. They are, without any fault of their own, thrust into a very complex criminal justice system. But what they need are services. It unfairly prioritizes the needs of people who are seeking a remedy in a court of law, with people who just want to heal. The vast majority of people need services. The other thing that I think it leaves out is the fact that Marsy's Law, it's a constitutional right. You're going to need to hire an attorney to assert your rights under Marsy's Law. Very few people are going to be able to hire an attorney for that. So it's really a law that's applicable to people of means, people with wealth.
So what about the component of the law that has to do with notification, letting victims know when their accuser is out on bail or out of prison?
There are statutes that protect that. If a person is released, and victims absolutely should be notified of that. They should be notified when their perpetrator is out on bail, absolutely notified if they're being released from prison, notified of certain stages of the proceeding, but this entitles them to all stages of the proceeding. So bail, let's say that it was a misdemeanor that was committed. People have rights. They have rights to a bail hearing. They have rights to certain procedural safeguards when they're arrested. So that victim, the notification process of waiting until you can notify that person who you may or may not be able to get a hold of could stall that and could conflict and affect the constitutional rights of that accused person.
I understand there are also some concerns about the confidentiality and privacy clauses. Is that also something you take issue with?
Yes, it is. There are issues of discovery.